Thanks again for being here. I really appreciate it. It's truly an honor to be able to be in conversation with all of you and to share some thoughts about practical leveraging of generative AI. For those of you who've been in any of my sessions before, um, what I often say is there's a lot of conversations about generative AI. For those of us on LinkedIn, it's overwhelming to me. Lots of good information, lots of good perspectives. But a lot of us have day jobs. I think all of us have day jobs of some sort. And so for me, these sessions are based on the types of things that I like to participate in and to learn from, which is that's great. How do I use this right now for things that I need to do? So I don't spend a whole lot of time on theory. I really want to go quickly, in the less than an hour that we have today to cover some things that I think, again, my real test of this is, by 1 o'clock Eastern, will all of you have something that you could start with in your day to day that you can use right now? So with that, that's my goal. That's my litmus test for how good I am at this. And hopefully I'll do well. So here we go with no further ado. So today's agenda, very quick introduction. Then we'll talk about aligning AI and Agile values. Those are two things, obviously, that we all care greatly about. How do we connect those two things together? Then again, the real gist of this conversation is how can we use these tools today for some common needs, some common use cases, some common scenarios that those of us in the product world have that we need to do, and how Gen AI can help us. Then with that, I usually say I try to get you all excited and hyped up about this, and then I kill the vibe, so to speak. Not really, but before we use generative AI, especially if you haven't used it greatly, it's a powerful tool, and like with any powerful tool, there's some risks and limitations, and I always want to make sure that I cover that. And then again, moving forward, suggested next step. So with that, let's go ahead and jump right in. A very brief introduction. So this is me. As you can tell, that's not DC for those of my friends back east. This is Red Rocks, one of my favorite places. I'm located in Nevada, and this is the Red Rocks Preserve, just a beautiful place. That's my backdrop. As Maggie said, I'm proud to be the Vice President of Consulting here at LitheSpeed. I'm also the VP of Professional Development for the PMI Northern Nevada chapter. 25 years or so in technology throughout all areas of the software development lifecycle, mostly fintech and insurtech. About 15 or so of those years in senior leadership roles, using agile ways of working, and 6 years or so leading product management and customer experience innovation for an AI NLP platform. And I'm not sharing my background to try to impress you with a very brief resume, but really to tell you about, again, this informs how I talk about these use cases because I've done this work before. My teams have done this work. And these are some things that when I look at the technology, I go, this is great. This can help us do a better job with some of these common functions. So I like to practice what I preach and preach what I practice. And that's what we'll go through today. As Maggie had said, I'd be happy to continue the conversation with any and all of you. Feel free to connect on LinkedIn. My last name's hard to spell, but there's a link in there that Maggie will provide, but happy to connect. So with that, AI hype is everywhere. I think that's the understatement of all understatements. I fear that I have heard the word game changer so often that I don't know what game we're changing, but AI truly is a transformative technology. So getting past the hype, again, practical usage of these tools. So Microsoft is using with IntelliCode AI to provide code suggestions real time. And again, we want to talk about the impacts of these tools, getting away from the novelty. This helps developers write higher quality code faster. Bug prediction, I would love to actually see more about this. I only know superficially, but Facebook uses an AI forecasting tool called Prophet to predict bugs and performance issues before they occur. Again, it's always better to address issues before they even are created as far as those escaped defects. So if we can use Gen AI to help us with forecasting and understanding where we might have bugs, that's going to really help us with the overall quality, but also efficiency. Relatedly, automated testing. I have a lot of background in QA, and I'm sure some of you do as well. We know how difficult it is to generate test cases, high quality test cases, especially at scale. So Uber uses Test AI to automatically generate and run test cases, again, helping ensure that we are delivering products of high quality and that the functionality is always being validated. Salesforce uses natural language processing for user stories. That's a great way. And we'll actually talk a little bit about user stories today in one of the scenarios, but using AI-driven analytics to help analyze user stories so that we can make sure that those stories are good. And then predictive analytics for sprint planning. We want to make sure that what we do for sprint planning is really focused on what's most valuable and making sure that we can have a solid sprint backlog. So Spotify is using data analytics and AI to predict sprint performance to make sure that we indeed can have solid and effective sprints and actually plan those sprints properly. So those are some real world applications of companies that we all know and products that we all use, how they're using AI today. So the first version of this deck that I put together a couple of years ago talked about what AI is. I think everyone kind of understands in general terms what AI or artificial intelligence is, but I do want to talk about what is different, even from when I was working in AI for about 6 years, as I had referenced earlier. Generative AI was not the AI that we were using. We were doing natural language processing and using other tools as far as machine learning. But Gen AI is new, and I hesitate to use the word game changer, but if I was going to, this would be one of the few areas where I would. So Gen AI is short for generative artificial intelligence. It's a subset of AI. So AI, like Agile, is an umbrella. Scrum is a specific instance, specific framework, et cetera, as is Kanban, XP, et cetera. Same idea for me with AI. AI is an umbrella. Gen AI is a subset of AI that really focuses on creating and generating data and content. Generative AI responses can mimic human-like creativity and ingenuity. Mimic is an important word there. We won't talk about that deeply in today's conversation, but again, human emulation, but still not exactly human. Where traditional AI systems primarily work with predefined rules and patterns, where generative AI truly is different is it has the capacity to produce new and original information, text, images, and music. So we're all here, LitheSpeed again as an organization about business agility and agile and lean ways of working. We've got principles that help us with our practices, and we really want to make sure that as far as these principles go, that we never lose sight of, getting past the tooling, getting past our practices. What are our agile values? What was in the manifesto, in the agile principles? So for me, artificial intelligence isn't inherently in support of or in conflict with agile values. It can be either, depending on its application. What I often say is that AI is very much, to me, like money. It's fungible. It's neither good nor bad. It's really how we apply it. So some ways that AI can be used to support and enhance agile ways of working and values in practical application are below. So when we think about the manifesto and we think about the principles, individuals and interactions over processes and tools, well, AI tools can help us enhance communication and collaboration within our Agile teams. We can use generative AI chatbots to help us facilitate team communication and assist with routine tasks. That allows us to true back to the principle where we can allow the team to focus on meaningful interactions, the people-to-people interactions. Working solutions over comprehensive documentation. So we still have, obviously, documentation needs in Agile ways of working. How can we leverage AI and the tools that are available from generative AI specifically so that we can still create the documentation that's required and then it's always updated, but again, also allowing these tools to help do the heavy lifting so that the humans have more time to do things that only humans can do. So these tools are incredibly helpful in terms of generating required documentation and helping keep it up to date. How about customer collaboration over contract negotiation? So we can use things like AI-powered analytics to help us provide insights into customer behavior and preferences. That can help us collaborate more effectively with customers so we don't have to worry so much about what our contract is and negotiating the details. We want to make sure that we've got a high quality and high frequency type of communication and collaboration with customers and really focus on that. And AI can help us so that we don't have to spend a lot of time about what was in the contract. And then responding to change over following a plan. So AI can help us with adapting to changes as far as where we can apply real-time data and insights. We can look at changes in user behavior and market trends if that applies for your context. And that allows us to, on an ongoing basis, adjust our strategies and priorities more quickly and effectively. And I would also say, really more accurately, we really can use different sources of data, sentiment analysis, and things like that to really understand how things are going and to understand where we may need to adapt. So it really will help the humans in terms of how we are looking at our strategy, what we're focusing on, and not being so focused on following a plan blindly. So that, to me, these are some of the key areas where AI really can help us align and really amplify, support those agile values, especially at scale. So what can GenAI do for our teams and our work? So one of the first is generating user stories. This is one of the first use cases that I tried these tools a couple of years ago, and I was really impressed. We know that creating good user stories can be challenging. Understanding users' needs, goals, and challenges is key. And we also know that new teams and product owners often struggle, especially when starting a new product. Gen AI can help us with both the creation of and refinement of user stories. And in this example, and if you have been in some of the prior sessions, you may have seen that I had a slide for user stories. This is a different variation of that I found useful that I think some of you may find as well, which is if I need to create a new backlog from scratch, how can I use generative AI? Again, not to do all of the work for me, but to get a good start. So you can see my prompt up there. All of these, by the way, are real world screen caps. This is ChatGPT. I've got some others from Claude. Really what I'm talking about is intended to be agnostic or irrespective of the specific tool that you're using. So these prompts, you may get different, slightly different responses depending on what you're using, but these prompts will be applicable regardless of tool. So I said, I'm creating user stories for an AI-powered mobile app to help product managers improve their knowledge and craft. Generate stories for this purpose in CSV format for importing into Jira. Add additional stories and refine the content as needed to have a solid backlog of work for the MVP and future versions of the product. Prioritize and include relative story point sizing. So that is quite the prompt. And some of you may already be saying, well, how can you do story point sizing? You know, that's really team specific. Agreed, but it's good to have a good starting point, even for us to take a look at in terms of what the relative type of effort might be for some of those common items. So I always say, you know, don't use what is generated from these tools as your final product, but this gives us a great way to get kickstarted very quickly. And you can see in the real world response there, a comprehensive list of user stories for the app as I'd request. And I had specified the format that I want so that I can import this directly into Jira. And if you're using ADO or other tools, obviously you can specify that. But you know, very quickly I was able to have sort of a kickstart of a basic backlog for that type of application. And that was generated in less time than it took for me to go through this slide. So we also often will need to refine our user stories. So if we're not just creating them from scratch, we often need to refine them more frequently than we're creating new ones. And Gen AI is also very helpful here with the refinement of those existing user stories. That allows us to help leverage better practices and be more consistent in our requirements. In this example, I pasted a handful of stories that I already had and asked for their refinement. And you can see when I provided that there, it immediately took the text that I just pasted in and it created some more structure. It refined a little bit the language that was being used, et cetera, so that I could have better quality stories from the ones that I had requested based on what I dumped out of Jira for this particular example. Gen AI made our good stories better. And the other thing that I would just really recommend is never accept the first response. We really want to have ongoing refinement. So when you get these responses, and this will be the thing that I'll repeat probably a couple more times before we finish today's session, it really is about iteration. And those of us in Agile and Lean ways of working, we already understand the idea of iteration. We already understand the idea of continuous improvement. Inspection and adaptation. So this is already baked into the way that we already work. That same principle applies. We want to continue to refine and interact based on what it's providing us. it has the prior interactions information in context. So I can continue. Again, I don't like to anthropomorphize these tools. I don't like to treat them like they're humans, but there are some things about how humans communicate that I think are really good analogies to use and practices in terms of if I'm talking to a human and they say something back to my request, some of it may make sense, some of it may not, or it may just spur a new idea. Either way, I keep that conversation going. Hey, what about this? What about that? So use that same sort of idea when you get these responses. Don't just copy and paste from whatever the response was. Continue to interact until you have what you think is going to be useful for you. This allows us for that continued refinement and expansion. So that's some things that you can do immediately in terms of creating a new backlog of user stories and for refining the ones that you have. So how about ideating with AI for new approaches for events and activities? For me, and perhaps for some, if not all of you, we know that the standard Agile events, I always hate calling them ceremonies. It sounds like a religious activity at that point, and I really don't like to think of it that way. But these events, these meetings, these special practices that we have in our Agile ways of working, they can really become boring and ineffective in many cases if we're just doing the same thing over and over again. It's good, I believe, to constantly experiment with different approaches to make sure that there's different engagement and different ways of sort of piquing curiosity and getting the team to interact, especially for things like this, which is for the backlog refinement session. We need variety, and we can leverage generative AI for different approaches and techniques for some of these events that we have. And in this particular instance, and this is Claude, by the way, Anthropic's Claude. And so I said, give me some good ideas on how I can do a better backlog refinement session. And I provided this context, and this is really important. My current process is boring and it seems inefficient and ineffective. I'd like to make it more interesting. I'd like to make it more interactive. So if I'm not having all of the team ask questions and participate in the dialogue about refinement, about what those stories mean, acceptance criteria, et cetera. I want them to be effective. I want them to be fun as well. So give me some real world ideas. And this is one of the ways that I like to ideate with these tools is I want it to give me a list of items, and then I want to really review those. Again, I'm the human in the loop here. So I want to look at some of these ideas and say, hey, which one of these might be one I want to experiment with? So I asked for a number of items. It gave me a number of items. Priority poker, the elevator pitch challenge, hot potato refinement. All of these are kind of interesting. And I decided to choose from one of those. I found the hot potato approach to be intriguing, perhaps even just for the name. And it just sort of sounded like fun, but it would be a different way to sort of mix things up a little bit, and perhaps get a little bit more curiosity, perhaps get a little bit more engagement. There's some novelty there that I think is helpful, again, to true back to what we want a good backlog refinement session to be, which is we want people to be interactive. We want people to be asking questions. If we want to prioritize our backlog and make sure the things at the top are ready for us to work on, everybody on the team should have some perspective on that. So let's get them involved. So with that, I said, hot potato seems like fun. Give me a full outline and details related about this approach so I can use it in my next session. So again, I had a list. I chose one that sounded interesting. And from that, I asked for the details. And then it provided this detailed outline, including the suggested duration, the rules, the process, and then an optional item for the rapid fire round at the end. And I really thought that that was interesting. I wanted that guidance on how to use it going forward. It had all of my prior context, so I can continue with my next responses based on this one. So another high value need or scenario that I've found in leveraging AI is for technical translation and communication. So we really, as product people, we often can find, at least I've found, I can't see all of you, so I can't read body language or see if there's anything in the chat, but having high quality stakeholder and executive communication really can be difficult. And we really want to make sure that we are communicating, again, as product people, our customers, we know, aren't monolithic. We have different stakeholders, we have different customers, and generative AI makes the process of generating communication oriented to those particular personas or roles. It makes it a lot easier and a lot quicker. So the current process that many of us use in terms of generating this communication can be risk prone. And even if it's not, is very time consuming. We want to make sure that we've got that high quality communication about what we're building, what we're delivering, why we're doing it, who we're delivering it for, what those outcomes are going to be. And so with that, we really can use these tools to help us to generate that really targeted communication, especially about the why. It also helps us ensuring that the language, length, and tone are tailored to the unique audiences. So in this example, I had a product data sheet, and I asked that it be refined and summarize the requirements into an executive summary of scope, features, and benefit. And again, I was very specific, and this is another one of the things that if you're not using these tools today, or if you're not, if you don't have prompts that are at least a few sentences, you probably want to take a look at that, because you want to specify with as much detail and context as possible to get the best quality outputs. I also put in what I don't want. Do not use any technical language or jargon. The audience is senior business executives who are sponsoring the project. So how many of us have generated communication that is jargon filled, that uses acronyms that we use, either technical or agile ways of working, those sorts of things? We talk about things like velocity, et cetera. That's not anything that we want in executive stakeholder communication. So it provided an executive summary on the left-hand side. And even with that, I thought that it was a little bit too deep. So I asked it in the follow-on the right-hand side, summarize the above to be in no more than 5 points and could fit on less than a single page of printed paper. Now, your executives or your stakeholders, your sponsors may want different things, but based on what you know, again, an executive level communication really should be focused on outcomes. It should be focused on the why. It should not have any of the technical details or any of those other underpinnings. They'll just gloss over. So if you look at the language here, our innovative platform is designed to revolutionize product management, education, et cetera. And then you can look at those enumerated points there. Tailored learning experience, interactive modules, and AI-driven practice scenarios adapt to individual skill levels, ensuring efficient and targeted skill development. You can see the other examples, but we're really talking about outcomes that will come up, things that our sponsors will want to know. If I'm making this investment, if this is what we're focusing on building and delivering, what's our why? What's our outcome going to be? And as product people, we know that we really need that why. We need to understand why we're doing this. And when it's done, what will the impacts be? What are things that the world will be different in terms of when this product is delivered? What will people be able to do? What does this product truly offer? Why does it exist? What problems is it solving at an executive level? So it's taken, in this case, a ton of information that I had available about what the solution is and summarized it to our stakeholders in language that they can use, understand, and appreciate. So one of the other areas that I found that was incredibly helpful from my perspective in terms of leveraging generative AI is also for persona development. So from that, again, continuing with that context that I'd had before, and this is another one of those superpowers, is if I'm using this in the same chat, it knows what I've already been talking about so far. So I don't have to start from scratch each time. Based on this, my next prompt, generate personas for the product that this project is developing. Use the attached content for context and to inform the personas. If you haven't done persona development and you're in the product world, this is something that you may want to look into a little bit more. Really, really helpful for those of us in the product world of understanding who are our customers. And it really helps not just us, but our team completely understand who we're building for. And that helps us really align. It helps us with our stories. It helps us with prioritization. It helps us with OKRs. It really helps us understand what we're doing, who we're serving, who this solution is really built for, and what they need. So I find personas to be a really key artifact for all of us in the product world. They help us remember and focus on those key users. And I have done this from scratch. I don't know how many times. I don't know that I would end with these, but again, same idea. This is a great first start. This is a great rough draft. And so in this particular instance, we talked on those prior slides about what this product is doing. And so personas were developed here. And if you haven't done personas, this is pretty common. You give a fictitious name, their sort of persona in terms of who they are, where they are in their career journey, age 28. So again, a fictitious creation. All of these are fictitious needs, but this individual, what their background is, in this case, very specific, marketing specialist transitioning to product management. They've got some goals there that they want, gain that foundational product management skill set, build confidence in product decision-making, and network with experienced product managers. And then it outlines what their needs would be: a structured learning path for beginners, interactive modules to practice new skills, community support and mentorship opportunities. There's another persona. So when we build personas, again, we very rarely are building a product that is only supporting one persona. If you only have one persona, I respectfully say you probably need a few more to be looking at, because very few applications, I can't think of any, are only supporting one group of users. And the more that you can understand with a little bit more specificity who we're serving and what their unique needs are, the better that you can build the product and that you can prioritize specific features and functionality in those stories. So there's another one there, Alex, mid-level product manager. So again, we're starting to differentiate between those two different roles. Age 35, background 5 years of experience. Okay, so he is very different than our fictitious Sarah. Fictitious Alex has experience in technical product management, but he wants to advance his product management skills. He wants to be updated with industry trends and understanding best practices. He also wants to improve leadership and stakeholder management abilities. So his needs are different than Sarah's. And this is true. And this is, again, why we like to have good comprehensive personas. What he's looking for is advanced learning modules on complex topics. He wants practice scenarios for real world challenges and analytics to track skill improvement over time. So different needs for different individuals. These would be things that would be in our backlog that we would look at, and then we'd have to decide, which of those personas perhaps do we need to focus on first in terms of our first delivery. But again, this is very helpful for informing what we're going to build, how we're going to build it, and how we prioritize what that looks like. Once you've created those personas, you can use generative AI tools like DALL-E to generate visual representations of each persona. For those of you who haven't done persona development before, this might seem a little bit unusual, but again, we're building for people. And if you haven't done this before, it's really helpful to have even images. And this is quite common, at least from my experience, where we will really have these fictitious characters and have personas for them, including a visual. And in the olden days, we actually used to put these up on the walls where the teams were working to remind ourselves of who we're building for, not just the pictures, but the entire persona. And that's a way for us to constantly remember that we're building for specific people with specific needs, and personas are really helpful to make sure that we're constantly remembering for whom we're building and what they need. So one of the other scenarios that I found useful, and this one you may want to consider, especially if you don't have sample data. So when we're developing a new or materially changed product, we often need data. This can be used to show a working prototype of an MVP, but also to test different scenarios. Generative AI tools can generate good quality synthetic data reliably. And in this data, we want to show in this example, we want to show some sample data for analyzing product usage. So again, if the product doesn't exist yet, and I want to provide a proof of concept, if I want to validate a hypothesis, if I want to show this potential application functioning, especially if it's something that is aggregating data or working with a lot of data, where are you going to find that data? This is a really easy way to generate appropriate representative synthetic data that you can use for ideation, for demonstration, etc. In this particular one, I asked for sample data for product usage. I'll be using this to show metrics management with AI tools. So in this particular instance, I made that request. And as you can see in the screen capture that we have down below, I got 1,000 rows in comma separated value format. That's for those of you who haven't done this before. It's a very old school format, but the good news on that is almost any tool can import that data set. So it's pretty easy to work with. And again, it will represent, it will be a synthetic chunk of data for a hypothetical SaaS project management tool for those columns. And so when I am also looking to use the data, I can provide that data here and provide based on that synthetic data, and you could use the same approach for real data, analyzing that information and offer some insights and recommendations based on the usage patterns and trends observed in the data. So I used that same data set to show you this example where I can actually use data. Again, if it's the synthetic example and we want to show what we might find, or if you want to use the same approach with real data that you're getting out of your system, you can put this into the tool. You can talk about feature usage and look at how it's done the analysis. So based on the data that was provided, it talks about, now I didn't say, tell me about feature usage, didn't tell me about subscription tiers. One of the things that I find really valuable is that I don't have to be prescriptive. I can just simply say, what are the trends that we're finding? What are the recommendations and insights? And it has what I believe is a quite unique superpower to look into that data and, again, using the power of generative AI specifically and understanding what are in these large language models. When I say provide analysis and recommendations, it knows the key things that I would want to know, things like feature usage. So I didn't have to say that. It provided that preemptively for me. And it not only provided that, but it provided the details of what features were being used. It showed things about the subscription tiers and those users and what they used. That is going to be golden for me to understand for paid users. How are they using the system? How much are they using the system? And again, that can be something that I can use from a product perspective of saying, do we want to do more about basic users because they're using fewer features in less time? Maybe I want to double down on enterprise users. It doesn't tell me what to do, but it gives me some suggestions on the right-hand side, but it gives me some information to work with so I can also make some decisions about what I want to do. It talks about the industry trends. It talks about team size and user engagement. Again, just from dumping a data set there and asking for recommendations. And I find that is incredibly valuable to really understand product usage in a meaningful way. It did, again, provide the recommendations that I'd asked. So feature optimization. So whether or not, again, you're the humans in the loop here, you get to decide which of these recommendations to work with if you like them. But in this case, feature optimization. And so it gave me some concrete ideas about what features are in use and how we could optimize them. And then there's some other functions that it's suggested there, targeted marketing, and then onboarding and training. So it suggested a couple of other items that, again, I would look at this and go onboarding and training, a more comprehensive onboarding process for basic and standard usage. Item 3 binds back to item 2 on the insights. So it's providing some targeted suggestions about things I could do in that instance about how I can get more use from our basic users there. And again, that's really valuable. I don't have to accept any of these, but it gives me some good ideas of things that I might want to focus on. So with that, those are some real world scenarios. We can share a copy of these prompts with you after the fact as well. But with that, again, here's the section where, again, if I get you all excited about what you can do and the power of these tools, again, I'll kill the vibe a little bit. Hopefully that is a little bit of a joke there, but we want to make sure that we're using these tools responsibly. So let's talk about in the real world and some of the risks that we want to be prepared for. So again, use the tools, but like any other powerful tool of any sort, doesn't have anything to do with technology, any powerful tool, we want to use it responsibly and thoughtfully. So the opportunities are substantial, but there are lots of risks and limitations to consider and to incorporate in how you use these tools responsibly. For me, some of these key issues are, so as much as I talked about the fact that these tools are great at keeping context, there is another sort of interpretation, a broader interpretation for me of the word context and contextual understanding. I saw this back when I was working with the AI company that I had mentioned at the beginning of our session. This had nothing to do with generative AI, but when you try to emulate humans, especially in using human language, and all of us have seen this, I think it's one of the real challenges that we have with the tools as they exist today is that there's not a lot of humility in them. And they don't say, I don't know, or I don't understand in most cases. So when they provide responses, they look very polished. They seem like an expert has provided an expert suggestion on something, and we won't necessarily know if it's wrong. And that's where each of us has that absolute responsibility to assess those things and to make sure that they are completely appropriate and accurate, including for our organizational context. So that is something that each of us needs to do. The more context you feed into your prompts, the more accurate you're going to be. But we still have to be the ones who assess that it is actually the correct and useful and usable answer for us. Relatedly, especially if you're using it for tools, the whole thing of vibe coding is both exciting and terrifying to me a little bit, because AI can produce great code that is absolutely functional. Superficially, it does what we want it to do. But we don't know if there are coding practices issues, if there are security issues, if there are other issues out there. And so they're definitely same ideas that we as the humans need to make sure that it's not just what's on the surface out there that's happening, but especially if you're using it for things like code or documentation production, you want to make sure that you're validating that properly and that it adheres to your particular standards and expectations in your organizational context. Relatedly, domain-specific knowledge. So again, these models are trained on a wide range of data that's generally publicly available on the internet and from other publications. They're great for things that I would say are commoditized in most cases. So if it's a very common need, a very common problem, I think they're great for things like OKRs, because that is a fairly well-established construct. But if you have something that's novel, that's really specific to your organization, that's new, that's unique, or that is a narrow focus for a specific domain, you may not be able to get responses that are going to be targeted, because there's simply not enough data in that particular model to be able to understand and assess that particular context. So it's just something to be thoughtful about. But again, especially in instances where your organizational focus, it may be something that's very unique to your organization, still use the tools, at least that'd be my recommendation, but understand that you need to have an even higher sensitivity on what the output is. And you also will likely need to iterate on that a number of times to get something that is appropriate and applicable for you. And then lack of creativity. So this may be philosophical as much as technical, but again, these models are based on probability. So they are going to be generating responses based on data that's in the model. So their ability to come up with novel and creative solutions, I still think that is largely in the domain of the humans. So you can use it to ideate, you can use it to suggest things, but in terms of truly novel solutions, there can be some practical limitations, again, just based on how these models are made in terms of creating those truly novel and creative solutions. So that still, I believe, is in the domain of humans, but you still can use these tools to help you ideate, to refine your ideas, to brainstorm, et cetera. So it's not a binary thing, but in these instances, use it even more thoughtfully and carefully. And so some next steps in terms of moving forward that I would suggest. Consider confidentiality, intellectual property, and related. So we want to be thoughtful about any data that's input into any generative AI tool. There should probably be an asterisk on the end of this, by the way. There are some organizations that have their own internal language models that they've built, or that have other constructs in place to make sure that the IP confidentiality and similar issues are mitigated. So check with your organization if you're using an internal tool. Some of these considerations are not going to be as substantial for all of you if it is indeed secured and locked down, et cetera. But that is something that you want to verify before you put things like anything from strategy to PII, PCI, GDPR, any of the alphabet soup of those sorts of compliance needs. Make sure that you're thoughtful about that you're not violating any of those practices or your organizational practices. In ChatGPT, if you're using this, and other tools have similarly obfuscated ways to turn this off, but by default, ChatGPT has an improved model for everyone, which is its way of saying, if you turn that toggle off, it won't include your prompts and your information into its model. If you don't turn that off, anything that you put in is going to be included. So again, just to be responsible and useful, if you're using tools that are outside of your organizational construct, off-the-shelf type tools of any provider, just make sure that you are properly authorized to use those and that you're using them responsibly, especially with data that may have compliance or related needs. And that's not just protected information, but again, intellectual property. You don't want your strategy information going into these models because it's really opaque in terms of how it gets used. But the best thing is to just not have it be used at all. So as you are moving forward, here's some other things, and you may have seen this in some of the prompts, but I want to be explicit about getting the most out of these tools. So some initial suggestions. Back when I started a very, very long time ago, there was a term of garbage in, garbage out. That was decades ago. Same principle applies, though. To get the best outputs, provide the best inputs. Think about roles. So who am I? Or who do I want to emulate in the example? So if I'm a product manager, if I'm an RTE, if I'm an enterprise coach, et cetera, whatever that role is, include that in the prompt where appropriate to help get more targeted responses based on that role. So that's who I am, or who I'm pretending to be. The next is the audience. So who are you? So who am I orienting this towards? So I showed you in the stakeholder communication for my executives. If I had that same construct for when I was talking about what the next release for that product was going to be, but if I was oriented to my technical leaders, I would have a completely different artifact from that same data set as far as technical leaders. And it would go into technical jargon. It would talk about things like APIs and those sorts of things. So think about the audience when you're generating something, or if you're ideating, you really want to be very specific. Same information targeted to different audiences. That's really a superpower of generating that very quickly and efficiently for those different audiences to communicate appropriately to them about what they care about and in language they understand. Context. I can't overstate this. You really want to include as much as possible. You saw in some of my examples, I talked about the existing sessions. There's not a lot of interaction. There's not a lot of collaboration. Provide that in there. Because that'll help orient the answers to be more specifically aligned to your needs. So if I'm talking about we're always hitting our due dates late, or if there's low product usage by a particular group, whatever that might be, include that context in your prompts to get more refined and useful and usable, sort of surgically focused answers back to what you're asking for. Format. You also saw this in a number of my examples. But rather than taking a whole bunch of bullet points and verbose language that came out of the tool, specify how you want the results. I'm embarrassed to say when I first started using these tools, I'd got that export and then I'd put it in Excel or some other tool and then pop it back, and just it got better. The tools got better, but I also got better about using it and saying, I want a PowerPoint friendly outline. ChatGPT now, and I think most of the other tools of its ilk, will generate artifacts for you. The quality is varying, but at least it gets me one step further. If I want a PowerPoint, generate it in PPT. If I want a Word doc, etc. So you can specify that. I use CSV a lot for importing data, but whatever format you need it in, you can request it. And it doesn't have to be an artifact, by the way. You can say table, or I'm going to send this in an email, and it will format it properly. So let it do the heavy lifting. Formatting, it's really good for. And then length. So explicit numeric constraints don't always work, but you saw, like in my example, make it less than half of a printed page. However you want to specify what that length is, different audiences are going to zoom over and just sort of tune out if you give them a 20-page document. So think about your audiences and what they want, but you can use things like 4 bullet points, 3 pages, whatever the case may be. Any of those sorts of things that you can see some examples there, but specify that. That will help really frame what responses you get so you don't have to go through and refine that. Let it do the heavy lifting for you. Also, when you're doing your prompt, think in terms of roles for those inputs. So do I need an expert opinion for a given topic? Well, then I've got a researcher type role. Do I really want it to provide that expert role? Be specific in terms of what you are looking for in those prompts. Writer, do I need help summarizing, detailing, or refining a written artifact? I find this to be really helpful. Again, showed some of those examples, but if I've got a really big, long construct of a document and I want that summarized into a couple of pages, that's a really good tool for this, or really good value for this particular tool. Think in terms of, do I want it to help me with either creating or especially refining or summarizing? Summarizing is really key for me, a written artifact. Or creator, do I need some ideas to help me get started on a new initiative or task? I like it for brainstorming. You saw some examples too. Give me 10 ideas and I'll usually choose 1 or 20 and I'll keep iterating till I find one that I like. It's really helpful there in terms of helping me brainstorm. So with that, some closing recommendations. Start today with a real world challenge that you have and see how these tools can potentially help. If you don't have any ideas, look to your last retro. Anything related from a product perspective that could go better in your retro? How did your demo go? How was the audience? Was the demo effective? Was it engaging? If it wasn't, then that might be a really good place for us product people to start. If we have issues with the quality of our stories, acceptance criteria, technical, non-functional criteria is a challenge for a lot of folks, functional criteria for others. Whatever that is, provide that into the tool with your existing stories. Those are just some immediate ideas. Look to your last retro, look to your last demo, but get started. Get started today, or get started tomorrow, but don't wait. Then experiment. It's not a browser. Have a conversation. We want to just keep iterating, and again, try those variations based on audience, experience, role, and persona. And try more than just ChatGPT. I think that's what, at the time of this writing and for most of the conversations I've had so far, that seems to be the de facto choice for many people. But you'll find all of these tools, at least from my experience, have different pros and cons. But try those other tools too, unless you're required by your organization to use an internal one or a specific one. And then always continue learning. As I'd mentioned, I did the first version of this deck 2 years ago. And the world changes about every 15 minutes. By the end of this presentation, things may have already changed, but progress is rapid. So follow happenings on LinkedIn or other sources. Consider additional training, including certified instructor-led. And LitheSpeed, by the way, if you use ChatGPT, has an Agile VMO Copilot. I find that to be really helpful, not just a shameless plug for LitheSpeed. But I find that tool to be very valuable, especially for product and agile ways of working. So those really are my suggestions. And that is, we've got just a couple of minutes, but that is the end of the conversation. Well, that is the end of the presentation. I hope it's not the end of the conversation. Sorry about that.